In this video, I'll be tackling a wide array of very hard to listen to topics that understandably might make a lot of my viewers very upset. Not mad, but just uncomfortable. And I want to say this for the record. I'm not making any jokes. I'm not going to be in character for my YouTube persona. I'm not gonna do anything silly. Like, I'm not gonna even make any sarcastic remarks this time. So, I want to make sure that I specify that, just ahead of time. I will be talking about these topics. I'm not going to be talking about them as if they were in a vacuum. I don't think there's any merit to actually doing that. That'd be stupid and selfish. Speaking of making sure that I'm not being selfish, while I will be using myself as an example slash basis and or template, that's not meant to be, that's not meant to be interpreted as me being selfish. It's just, an example template at best, or I guess at worst, if that makes sense. So let's start by tackling the topic of being socially backwards, I guess. This is something that I don't actually hear a lot of people talk about, not even YouTubers, but people in general, and I do know why this happens. Because it's a difficult topic to talk about, a lot of people fold, and it's something that they're scared of. And also, before I continue that part of the conversation, understandably, people are, going to get upset about this, like I said earlier, but I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that I'm the best at this. Nor am I the worst at this. That's because of me being philosophical. No one, or, there's nothing, or there's no person or thing or whatever that is the worst, in the same way that there's no person or thing whatever that is the best. Let me get that out of the way before we do anything serious. So as far as the socially backward thing goes, I actually wish that more people would stop playing generic M-rated FPS games that are set in a militaristic setting, because it focuses on the stereotype of conflict and is so socially backwards that it doesn't know what it's doing. Call of Duty, no doubt, is definitely what spawned this. It's a very uncomfortable, socially backward stereotype that docks you points dead on arrival. And I'm not saying that, I'm all for the mindset that, everyone is allowed to enjoy whatever they enjoy, absolutely. But if you want me to get even more philosophical, and if you want me to talk about this from a moral perspective, well, I'm not saying, people shouldn't enjoy X, Y, or Z. It really raises a lot it raises a lot of eyebrows, is what I'm trying to say. It's all because of morality is why I will always, always, always be against generic M-rated games that focus on being as shocking, offensive, racist, whatever, as possible. And you can count R-rated movies, adult cartoons, or literally any and all generic raps, breakup songs, whatever, that are also socially backwards for the exact same reasons. I want to talk about music specifically, though, for a little bit. If we're talking specifically about, literally any of those generic teenage angst, whatever, breakup songs that, admit, you probably heard one yourself once at some point in your life. They almost always paint the girl or the guy, whatever, in the worst light possible, which is one-sided, hypocritical, and toxic, and is going to backfire on you instantly. In the case of rap, I don't take that seriously. I don't respect it either. Yes, even though I just mentioned prior that I'm all for the whole mindset of, everyone has the right to enjoy X, Y, or Z, but let's throw that out the window for a minute. It'll make sense as I go on, so pardon me. Especially when you realize that, so many rappers claim that they're tackling a really dark topic with respect, something emotional, a loss of a family member or a close friend. But also, at the same time, once you get into the meat and potatoes of, if you deconstruct a lot of raps in the modern day and age, specifically, they're not only socially backwards, but they're really, really insensitive. And no, let me clarify this before this goes south. I'm not talking about just swearing. That'd be stupid. Although, yes, I will always be against swearing from a moral perspective. It's not like you hear me talk about how immoral that is every single waking hour. Like, that's stupid. No, I'm referring to things that are actually, like, more than surface level bad. Like, being homophobic, racist, sexist. Like, that's not tackling a dark topic with respect. That is horrible. And people like that who claim that they know what they're talking about really don't, and really have to stop doing things like that. Death metal is probably another example of something that I don't take seriously. Like, considering that it's literally called death metal, it's something that you are not meant to take seriously dead on arrival. And also, before anyone says, "Oh, you have no right to judge it, you never experienced it," like, yes, I have. I have done a lot of. I have no, not a lot. I have listened to a few like generic and borderline offensive, forgettable, like raps, death metal, quote unquote songs, thrash metal, quote unquote songs, and those generic, really, really insensitive and socially backwards breakup songs. Like, despite being from different genres, because of how backwards they all kind of run together. Because none of those musicians know what they're talking about. Like, it really does raise quite a few eyebrows, because I don't respect those people. No, not the people who like are fans of that, but like, the people that are creating this stuff. Like, referring specifically to music, it's white noise. It's forgettable because of how insensitive it is. Like, I know this is gonna sound hypocritical, biased, whatever, but it's actually not once you realize this. But I really wish that more people would listen to Imagine Dragons music, because Daniel Coulter Reynolds, Daniel Wayne Sermon, Daniel James Platzman, and Benjamin Arthur McKee are people who know what they're talking about. Like, sure, they use metaphors for their lyrics and stuff, but first of all, not only do they again know what they're talking about and tackling really difficult topics like that with the most utmost respect, which is something that a lot of artists don't understand or even care about in some cases. Like, sure, they use metaphors, fine, but like, put it this way: can you think of any other musician that doesn't shoehorn in references to sex, gore, violence, whatever, just to pander? Like, that's what death metal, thrash metal, and rap do for the exact. Like, they're all the same. And those breakup songs are hypocritical, one sided, and toxic, because it just amounts to, okay, but instead of making a piece of music history that is cemented and immortalized into music history, you could have avoided falling into that trap and talked to the person that you personally hurt. That's something that I myself am very familiar with, because, and let me specify the context before people take this out of context, I used to blame other people for my actions back when I was really stupid and didn't know what the frick I was talking about. That's something that I'm all too familiar with, and I can openly admit my own flaws. Let me get that out of the way right now. But, like, Imagine Dragons are the band that I literally, like, they're more than a band. Like, they're people who are just so genuine. They don't care that they're famous, even though they know that they're famous. They don't let fame go to their head. They don't even care that they're famous and wealthy either. Like, a lot of their songs are really, really deep if you look into them. Or I guess if you listen to them? I don't know how else to word that, if that makes sense. But, like, and I think I said this before on camera, so pardon me if it does sound cliche, but, like, you ever keep track of how many people have said that music changed their lives? Like, how generic that sounds? Like, the stereotype, "Oh, music changed my life, man." But in those cases, it's very, very common for those cases to be coming from hypocrites who are goths listening to generic death metal music, which is not helpful for tackling depression, for instance. Like, I'm not even being sarcastic or targeting anyone specifically, but, like, at the same time, like, if a person's depressed, they really shouldn't listen to death metal to recover from depression. It's not therapeutic, it's not relaxing, it's generic white noise that really, really doesn't make any sense in that context. But, like, I think I've shared the story on camera before, but in case I haven't, I will mention it again, and I will be as open about it as possible. I'm not going to hide anything from you guys. I don't want to do anyone wrong. But side note, very very important side note. This part of the conversation is going to get very very dark. We're venturing into very very dark territory. You have been warned. So back in 2016, when I was still at this residential day program thing, whatever. After I started putting on an eye patch, which, by the way, also another side note, I don't care what people say about me anymore. I'm done with that. Especially because, in hindsight, I'm always willing to fight the good fight and defend the people that I do legitimately care about, but I digress. I was bullied to heck and back. Like, people kept calling me a pirate, people started calling me blindy, whatever. And this is probably the most controversial thing that anyone has ever said to me, but also, again, at the same time, I don't care what people say about me anymore. But also at the exact same time, I understand that it's going to be very, very uncomfortable for people to listen to. So pardon me. 3, 2, 1. I was called a one-eyed retard. That was almost the last straw for me in the context that, yes, I did almost commit suicide. It was a very, very dark time for me. And yeah, I understand how generic that sounds, but like, once you realize that this is a story actually worth listening to, it really does make sense. Like, what helped me recover from that, like, what saved my life, as opposed to, like, the generic stereotype of changed my life, was when I listened to Imagine Dragons music and I actually started to analyze the lyrics of music that I do listen to. It's why I broadened my horizons and started listening to other musicians. I don't just listen to Imagine Dragons, by the way. Like, I like music that's actually music that has meaning to it in its lyrics, as opposed to, death metal, thrash metal, rap, pretty much any generic breakup song. Like, if you want to discover music, like, as a medium, as an art form rather, give Imagine Dragons a chance. Like, considering they're not socially backwards, and they are willing to tackle difficult topics with respect, something that, I don't see any other musicians to this day tackle. It is going to hit way too close to home for most people, and a lot of their songs, particularly a lot of the slower ones, are going to absolutely destroy you. Like, Wrecked is probably the most poignant example of this. Like, one particular lyric that is bound to hit way too close to home for anyone and destroy them, including myself, is the lyric, "I'll see you again, my loved one." Like, if you actually analyze that lyric, it's actually referring to how Dan Reynolds, in 2019, he actually lost his half-sister. I think it was half-sister or sister-in-law. I can't remember because my brain is really stupid sometimes. But he actually lost his sister-in-law or half-sister due to a very, very dire form of cancer. I think it might have been stage 4. I can't remember. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that Dan was right there in the hospital when she took her very last breath, and the song Wrecked was written immediately after this. It was written in 2019, and it was part of the album Mercury Act 1, which released in 2021. And it was also added to Mercury Acts 1 and 2, additionally. It's a very, very hard to listen to song for that reason, because I'm pretty sure we have all dealt with loss. Once again, that's not me being sarcastic. It's me being as understanding as possible. Like, that just goes to show how genuine music can actually be if it's done by people who actually know what they're talking about. And now I want to talk about video games. I talked about music for a lengthy period of time. I think I mentioned this. Yeah, I did mention this earlier. But I really wish that people would play more E/E10 plus raid games instead of generic gore fests / jump scare fests. Because, like, if you analyze that, it's boring. It's actually boring. Like, in the FPS genre, again, Call of Duty definitely sparked all of this, but so many FPS games are just carbon copies of Call of Duty, to the point where they run together. Pardon me, I have a case of sniffles going on. Like, the only exceptions and games are actually good, I might add, and though it wasn't me being sarcastic or hypocritical, are the latest, what what was it? The Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare games, and the Plants vs Zombies Battle for Neighborville, I think is what it's called. Which that's a very very silly and cartoony FPS game, which has a sense of adventure, which is something that again. For example, the Call of Duty games have next to no substance at all in terms of story structure. I mean, they have substance in terms of, like, blood, but, that's not a good thing. That's not an endorsement. Another example, and another reason why people have no excuse, like, I understand, that a lot of people, like, actually, no, I'll get to this later, but I, at the same time, don't understand, are kind of, what's that word? Kind of, they're not really interested in things that have like a very silly art style. And what comes to mind is Splatoon. The Splatoon series is actually really, really good. But a lot of people are kind of turned off, like Dead on Arrival, just because they assume that it's just for kids because of the art style. But again, pardon me for being philosophical once again, and I'm not pulling a Fox News on you, absolutely not. I'm not trying to say that, oh, Emerald games are spawning killers into the real world, whatever. No, that's stupid. Please don't assume that ever again, by the way, Fox News. What I'm saying is that, people need to play more games that are really good at tackling dark topics, or in Splatoon's case, games that are actually refreshing and enjoyable. I can't remember all of it, considering that there's 3 games to cover plus a Japanese exclusive manga. But I am aware that Splatoon actually has a pretty good story. Again, it spans across 3 games and a manga. I think there might have been an anime in Japan as well. I might be misremembering that, so pardon me. And not to mention, and I don't know if this is going to be considered stupid, but like so many FPS games, whatever, Emery games in general, that aren't Metal Gear Solid, trust me, are just so drab looking and bleak and ugly as sin as a result. Sniffles. Like, they're just so by the numbers. Like, they're just so generic and forgettable as a result. Like, and the characters, like a lot of those games have characters that you're not going to care about because they have next to no personality. And no, not in the way of a self-insert character where the character is intentionally supposed to have no personality. Like, a majority of those Emery game characters have very little personality as opposed to no personality whatsoever. Like, it's usually the most by the numbers cliche ever. Like, they have a tragic past, or they're hardened by war. And you've seen it time and again. Like, I'm not alone on that. Like, it's something that we see time and time again. And it's almost always used as a vehicle excuse for the character to do horrible things. Like, I've seen those character stereotypes before. The character that is apparently good but turns out to be actually evil in the end. That's a very common character stereotype that has, in my opinion, aged horribly. And that's also why I don't respect / take seriously the Grand Theft Auto games, because the characters, while they're made to be awful intentionally, that's not an endorsement. Like, that is not something you should be advertising. Because, like, they're not like actual, like, villains from what I remember. Like, those characters aren't villains. They're very, very abusive, though, which is, once again, not an endorsement. Awful characters can be done right, though, which, again, that's usually reserved for, well, villains. In the case of, say, Superior Iron Man, which is a story that I do actually enjoy for that context. And especially because it doesn't come out of nowhere. Tony Stark doesn't become evil out of nowhere because plot device. It's actually explained. If you read the Axis story arc before you read the Superior Iron Man story arc itself, it's actually pretty believable for Tony Stark to become the most sadistic, cunning, and sinister villain in the entire Marvel multiverse. Well, specifically the universe, because he actually does win in the end of the Superior Iron Man storyline by enslaving Earth 616, which that's why I tell people that he did actually take over the world. Like, he wins and enslaves all of Earth 616, not the multiverse. But, like, it's believable within his personality because he used to be just as awful before he became a hero. But that's an example of, a villain, like a character that you're supposed to hate. In the case of, again, the Grand Theft Auto protagonists, like, those are characters who we're supposed to see as protagonists, but, like, they're really, really abusive. And again, if we're referring to Superior Iron Man, like, that's intentional, but, like, that's a good thing because of how it works within his character. But, like, the Grand Theft Auto characters, and, like, a lot of M-rated characters that aren't Snake or any of the Metal Gear Solid characters in general, like, those other characters just run together in terms of personality. Like, it's really, really, really boring. On top of all of this, it paints the world that the game is set in the most bleak reality possible, which is very, very polarizing. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of the whole bleak world cliche. Like, if it's done properly, the dystopian future / post-apocalyptic future that's not stereotypical / predictable, like, it can be done properly. Ironically enough, which episode was that? Operation Future from Kids Next Door, which is aimed at kids primarily, but can be enjoyed by adults as well, handled that quite well. I think that show is pretty good at doing dark topics. And that actually brings me to my next statement. Not opinion, belief, whatever, but actual statement. Like, I don't... Again, case of sniffles. I don't really care or understand why people, like, especially people who claim to be adults, who aren't adults in the slightest. Like, the stereotype is, being an adult involves being edgy and macho and insensitive, whatever, if we're referring to, like, guys specifically. And that stereotype, I know for sure. That stereotype pretty much surfaced because of all of the, like all of those really insensitive sitcoms from the 1980s, because of how, let's just say, insensitive the male characters are towards their loved ones, or at least the people that they claim they love. Like, that trope, right? Like, why are these two together? They obviously do not love each other at all, and their relationship is clearly unhealthy. Like, it's just a really uncomfortable stereotype, but I think I'm kind of getting sidetracked. Like, this might be kind of hard to word, so pardon me. But, like, a lot of guys tend to get stereotyped as, not caring about the women in their lives because bleh, which that stereotype, ironically enough, originated from those very, very uncomfortable by proxy sitcoms which have aged horribly. That's a very uncomfortable stereotype that I do not support. Like, the common excuse that I hear tossed around a lot is because they're live action, that automatically means that's how our real world works. That's also uncomfortable because it's not true in the slightest. It's very socially backwards, and it causes people to not respect you or take you seriously. But I was talking about cartoons. Yes, I was. I really wish that more people would actually, like, more adults would not fold and stop being afraid to enjoy cartoons aimed at kids and adults alike. Like, that's actually why I love the SpongeBob SquarePants movie so much. The first one, not the second or the third one, which, by the way, I can't watch the third one because we all know what happened. But I was talking about the first one. The first one gave a very universal message that I think is more than important right now. If I may be brutally honest, I'm, trying to make sure that I choose my words as carefully as possible so I don't get myself set on fire. That's a metaphor for choosing words poorly, by the way. But, like, the universal message of the movie was to not be afraid to hold on to your inner child. Like, it's not something you should be ashamed of. Like, I actually relate to SpongeBob quite a lot as a result, because I'm very, very childish, not 5-year-old. Let me make that absolutely clear. I don't know why people misinterpret that stereotype. But, like, I'm open to say that I am not ashamed to admit that I am a man-child. And like I said, it's not like, the stereotype of, oh, man-child, this person wears diapers, whatever. That's the stereotypical assumption. Whereas the traditional actual terminology of the term man-child, again, using SpongeBob as a basis and myself as a basis, like, someone, like, specifically a guy, who isn't afraid to be silly and cartoony. Like, I can be very, very childish, again, not 5-year-old. 5-year-old is baby stuff in the air, mind you, and childish is, any age higher than that. Like, I can be very, very kooky and silly and stuff like that, but I also strike the balance by knowing when to be a chivalrous, civilized individual. which is something that I don't see a lot of people acknowledge. Like, that's where the whole, being an adult slash being mature stereotype is once again very uncomfortable, but I already mentioned that earlier, so I don't have to repeat myself. But, like, hold on to your childhood innocence. It'll help you live a virtuous life. Like, I'm not preaching or anything like that when I say this, but, like, that's how I, live a virtuous life. I'm not forcing people into my way of thinking, let me make that absolutely clear. I'm just trying to spread positive advice. I'm a very motivational speaker kind of person, if that makes sense. I feel like, that's why more people really need to watch cartoons like, again, SpongeBob. And there are other cartoons out there, too, that are forms of escapism that, yeah, a lot of people may see them as, just child stuff, but, like, even adults that, I've met online for the first time, they really, really enjoy things like they grew up watching things like, SpongeBob SquarePants, Fairly Odd Parents, Danny Phantom, etc. Like, there are people that I've met online you know, who have hung on to their childhood memories, and that's a very, very virtuous and admirable thing to do. Like, what I meant when I said, whenever I talk to someone online they meet for the first time, like, they reminisce on their past. I must choose my word. I must have chose my words poorly there for a minute. I'm sorry. But, like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, my initial point is reminisce on the past as opposed to dwelling on the past. We have to, acknowledge the good things that we've done as opposed to the mistakes that we've made. Because if you're able to look past the mistakes that you've made, you will walk down the path of virtue. It's a very, very important thing that I don't see a lot of people acknowledge in the modern day and age. And that's due to polarization. The whole stereotype of that's reality or that's how the real world works is very, very polarizing, and it's not comfortable. And speaking of that, I think I should wrap this up at some point. What time is it?
The time is 1:50 p.m.
Yeah, I might wrap this up in a little bit, but, like, not helping matters is slander, news media outlets, etc. Those are very, very uncomfortable, which is why I'm going to make this the last topic that I talk about in this video specifically. But, like, if you ever realize how a lot of news media outlets, like, they claim they're telling the story, when in actuality, they're only telling their side of the story, which is also very uncomfortable. Like, they will use very shoddy manipulative editing to the point where it looks like you're watching the real story or reading the true story if it's a news article, like, if it's just text, writing, whatever. No, they will cut as many corners as possible and use as many edits as possible to paint someone in the worst possible light. This part might be, no, it's going to be very uncomfortable for people to listen to, and that's why I'm going to end the video after I talk about this specifically. But slander is going to backfire on you no matter what. One of the most infamous examples of this is how there was a fabrication, yes, a fabrication, that people took seriously that was called a rape on campus. People took that seriously. It led to riots and destruction and destroying the lives of the accused. It was horrible. People to this day still believe that it was a real thing. So, I guess I should close this by saying that I really hope that nebulous negativity stops. Openly speaking, as someone who is a very optimistic person, yes, despite the fact that I've been, using my vocal tone that's very, very serious, my serious vocal tone throughout the entirety of this video, but, that's me being civilized, like I mentioned earlier, striking that fine balance. Like, us as a society, we need to stop being so jaded. It's not good for anyone. Like, I even used to be jaded. Like, I used to blame people for my actions, which is a stereotype that people in general fall victim to. Like, I fell victim to that in the air, mind you. It's something that has aged horribly. And if we can stop spreading nebulous negativity, slander, whatever, then we can all move on with our lives. So, with that being said, this is Sir Bop-A-Lot, signing out.